Ill-fated lovers? Or a straight-up red flag parade? Everyone's got their own opinion about Charles and Diana's marriage, but one thing is no doubt true. It was doomed from the very beginning.
Because of Princess Diana's youth and inexperience, in The Firm, royal biographer Penny Junor described Diana as being, quote, little more than a child when she first arrived.
Last year, the world watched as King Charles bravely battled cancer.
Buckingham Palace has said King Charles spent a short period of time in hospital today after experiencing the temporary side effects of his cancer treatment.
Against the odds, he pulled through, and many believed the worst was over. But now, something shocking has come to light. According to new reports, the king may be facing an even more serious health scare, one that's far more life-threatening than before. The palace hasn't confirmed the full story yet, but royal insiders are hinting that this new development is really concerning. And that's not all. In a surprising twist, King Charles is also said to be confirming a few long-rumored suspicions, things people have quietly wondered for years. What exactly did the king admit? Stay with us as we uncover all the details behind King Charles's latest and most personal battle yet. King Charles' revelation. When the world heard that King Charles had cancer, people everywhere felt sorry for him.
Breaking news from Buckingham Palace, which has announced that the king has been diagnosed with cancer.
They wished him a quick recovery and hoped for the best. But along with the sad news came something surprising, something many didn't see coming. It had to do with Princess Diana. Even though Diana passed away many years ago, her name is still often mentioned. She was loved by so many, and now,
Princess Diana will always be remembered as a groundbreaking force for change. The late royal broke down barriers by embracing her soft side.
it seems King Charles is finally saying things about her that many people have wondered about for years. We all know Charles didn't treat Diana the way she deserved. And now, as he faces serious health problems, it seems he's starting to realize that too. Reports say the king has opened up about his past with Diana, and what he said has shocked many. So what did King Charles say? Keep watching to find out. But to understand it all, we need to go back to where it started, with Diana, Charles, and Camilla. Charles met Camilla first at a polo match, thanks to a friend who introduced them. They got along right away. She made him laugh. She was kind, and she wasn't nervous around him. Charles liked that. But then he joined the Royal Navy, and their time apart made things hard. While Charles was away, Camilla got back together with Andrew Parker Bowles, a man she had known for years. Back then, many people didn't think Camilla was suitable to be a future queen, so she and Charles didn't stay together. While Charles was serving in the Caribbean with the Royal Navy, Camilla said yes to Andrew's proposal. And when Charles heard the news, he was heartbroken. He couldn't understand how something that had felt so good and real between them could end so quickly. Ultimately, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles on July 4th, 1973, even though Charles had asked her not to. But even after her marriage, she and Charles stayed close friends. Not long after, Prince Charles met Lady Diana Spencer. Diana was just 16 when she first met Prince Charles.
As for Charles, he was entirely impressed with then 16-year-old Diana's charismatic and happy demeanor.
But it wasn't until a few years later, in the summer of 1980, that things began to change between them. They met again at a house party, and this time Charles started to see Diana as someone he could seriously date. Sitting on a hay bale at a barbecue, Diana spoke gently to him about the loss of his great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who had been killed by the IRA. She told Charles how sorry she felt for him, and that he deserved to have someone in his life who truly cared for him. At that moment, Charles was going through a lot, and what Diana said really moved him. But this wasn't actually their first meeting. Charles had met Diana before, back in 1977, when he was dating her older sister, Lady Sarah.
Before Diana dated Charles, he had dated her older sister Sarah in 1977.
It was 1977. Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's.
He thought Diana was cheerful and fun when he visited the Spencer family home, Althorp. Diana also went to Charles's 30th birthday party in 1978 and joined him again in 1979 for a royal weekend at Sandringham. After that, Charles occasionally invited her to events like the ballet or dinner with friends. At the time, they were just friends. Diana was simply enjoyable to have around. It wasn't until their talk about Lord Mountbatten in 1980 that Charles really saw her as more than a friend. Wanting to get to know her better, he invited Diana to Balmoral, where he was spending a summer holiday with friends. Diana quickly won everyone over. She was charming and funny and seemed to adore Charles. Everyone loved having her around. At first glance, she seemed like the perfect match for the prince. Back then, it was expected that the future queen would be a virgin from an aristocratic family and a member of the Church of England. But by the 1980s, after major social changes and the rise of modern dating, women who fit that description were few and far between. Diana, however, seemed to check every box. She looked like the ideal bride, young, joyful, innocent, and full of life. But things didn't stay simple for long. How? Keep watching to find out. The moment the public got wind of their relationship, everything changed. Ever since Charles was a teenager, the press had followed his love life closely, wondering who the next queen might be. Every woman he dated was put under the spotlight. This made dating difficult, and it happened again with Diana. Once the press found out that Charles was dating Diana, things quickly got out of control. Reporters crowded outside her London apartment, and photographers followed her everywhere she went. Overnight, Diana became a media sensation. With all the attention, it became nearly impossible for her and Charles to build a relationship in private or to get to know each other in a normal way. At the same time, Charles was facing pressure from his father, Prince Philip. He was in his 30s, and Prince Philip believed it was time for his son to stop dating around and settle down with a wife. After all, the royal family needed an heir to keep the monarchy going. So, did Prince Philip tell Charles to marry Diana? That question has been asked for years. It all started with a memo Prince Philip sent to Charles in early 1981. In it, he told his son to make a decision, either marry Diana or let her go. But according to royal biographer Penny Junor, Charles misunderstood the message. The royal family often communicated through formal letters or memos instead of talking directly. So instead of seeing it as advice, Charles took the memo as a command that he had no choice but to marry Diana. Not long after, on February 6, 1981, Charles proposed to Diana at Windsor Castle. But as Junor explains, it was a tragic mismatch. At that point, Charles and Diana had barely spent time together. Diana later said they had only met about 13 times before the engagement, and most of those times weren't even in private. In truth, they hardly knew each other at all. After the engagement, Diana's life changed dramatically, and not for the better.
Tonight's dinner at Clarence House is rather special, not just because this is engagement day, but because Lady Diana is able to dine with her fiancé at her home for the first time.
At just 19 years old, she left behind her life in London, where she lived happily with a few close friends and moved into a set of rooms at Buckingham Palace. Everything felt strange and unfamiliar. She was suddenly alone in a huge palace, far from the warm, fun life she had known. Junor says that Diana seemed like a completely different person once she moved in. She became emotional and upset easily. She would cry often and became jealous whenever Charles went out or spent time with others. Her moods shifted constantly. Becoming famous so quickly was overwhelming, and it started to take a toll on her well-being. Charles, who was constantly busy with royal duties and public events, didn't know how to handle Diana's emotional changes. He was confused and unsure of what was going on. Behind the scenes, Diana was also struggling with serious mental health issues, including bulimia, an eating disorder.
Years later, she would admit to being in the grip of a devastating eating disorder.
I had bulimia for a number of years.
Her emotional pain went back to her childhood. Diana had a rough start in life. Her parents had a troubled marriage and split up when she was only 6 years old. That early trauma stayed with her. And even as a young woman, she was still carrying the scars. Diana battled bulimia for years before she finally got professional help. It's hard to say exactly when it started, but according to royal biographer Penny Junor, the illness was already in full swing by the time she and Charles went on their honeymoon. At first, doctors may have even thought she had anorexia instead. Junor believes the eating disorder was just one part of a bigger problem. Diana had been struggling with her mental health since childhood. The emotional pain she carried from her early years showed up in many ways, and bulimia was one of them. Bulimia and anorexia are both very serious and damaging illnesses. They're hard to live with and even harder to talk about. But Diana didn't keep it a secret forever. In 1992, her struggles became public when journalist Andrew Morton released his book, Diana, Her True Story. Diana had secretly worked with Morton to tell her side of the story.
My name's Andrew Morton. I wrote Diana, Her True Story 25 years ago. Here was the world's most famous woman about to give me some information about her life.
Then, in her famous 1995 interview with Martin Bashir on BBC's Panorama, Diana spoke openly about her bulimia and how lost she had felt. Junor says Diana often felt like no one could truly help her. She did see regular therapists, but also tried alternative methods, like astrologers and crystal healers, hoping to find some kind of peace. But all the while, Diana was battling with bulimia. The world was preparing for her fairy tale wedding. The royal wedding. Charles and Diana were married on July 29, 1981, at St. Paul's Cathedral in what many called the wedding of the century. But behind all the facade, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. According to royal biographer Penny Junor, both Charles and Diana likely knew they were making a mistake the day they walked down the aisle. But calling off a royal wedding that big would have taken a lot of courage. Charles had always believed that marriage should last a lifetime, and he wanted to make sure he picked the right partner. Even though he didn't truly love Diana at the time, he thought he could grow to love her, and he intended to make the marriage work. Many people have believed that Charles used Diana just to have an heir and a spare, and once that was done, he went back to Camilla, the woman he always loved. But Junor doesn't agree with that version of events. She believes Charles never planned to hurt Diana. He just ended up in a marriage that was deeply unhappy for both of them. In the end, they were simply a tragic mismatch. Charles and Camilla had broken off their romance when she married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973. She focused on her role as a wife and mother, and for a while, she and Charles remained just friends. But after Camilla gave birth to her second child in 1978, their affair restarted. Then, in 1979, when Charles lost his beloved great-uncle Lord Mountbatten,
I remember only too well feeling deeply angered when my great-uncle Lord Mountbatten and other relations of mine were blown into small pieces 19 years ago.
He turned to Camilla for comfort. She was his best friend, his confidant, and once again, his lover. This second affair lasted until Charles got engaged to Diana in 1981. Camilla's own marriage wasn't happy. Her husband was unfaithful, and Charles made her feel seen and appreciated. She enjoyed the connection while Charles was still single, but once he got engaged, Camilla understood that their romantic relationship had to stop. When she realized Diana was uncomfortable with her presence, she stepped back. One big issue was that Charles never told Diana about his past with Camilla. Early in their relationship, Charles even took Diana to stay with the Parker Bowles family, without ever mentioning that Camilla had once been more than just a friend. Diana found out later through palace gossip. She was only 19 and felt hurt and embarrassed, but that was not all she found out. Just days before his wedding to Diana, Charles and Camilla met for one last lunch. At that lunch, Charles gave Camilla a bracelet engraved with the letters G and F, nicknames they used for each other, believed to stand for Gladys and Fred. Shockingly, Diana had found out about the bracelet just 2 weeks before the wedding. She discovered it in the office she shared with Charles's private secretary, Michael Colborne. Charles had asked Colborne to order jewelry for several women he'd been close to during his bachelor years, gifts meant as polite thank yous for their companionship. All the jewelry was delivered to the office and placed on Colborne's desk. But while Colborne was called away to a meeting down the hall, Diana, left alone in the room, opened the boxes. When Colborne returned, he found her storming out of the office, furious. She had seen the bracelet meant for Camilla and was consumed by jealousy. Camilla still attended Charles and Diana's wedding, but afterward, she and Charles didn't speak or see each other for nearly 5 years, except for when Charles informed her of Prince William's birth.
The announcement was posted on the gates of Buckingham Palace that the Princess of Wales was safely delivered of a boy at 9:03 p.m. Her Royal Highness and her child are both doing well.
William was born in June 1982, less than a year after the wedding, and it was one of the happier times in Charles and Diana's marriage. According to Juner, friends who visited Kensington Palace in the early 80s described a joyful home. Diana would dash around the house chasing William, who liked to hide under Charles's desk at bedtime. Charles and Diana would playfully chase each other up the stairs. Diana later told journalist Andrew Morton that the time leading up to Prince Harry's birth in 1984 was the happiest period of her marriage. Diana loved being a mother. She adored William and Harry with everything she had. For someone who craved love the way Diana did, becoming a mother gave her deep comfort. Having children was the best possible thing for Diana, says Junor. But even as she flourished in motherhood, tensions in the marriage were growing. Diana's moods could be unpredictable. She was incredibly complicated, Junor explains. There were things she did behind closed doors that the public never saw. And that's why so many people only believe her version of the story. Andrew Morton's 1992 biography. Diana, her true story, shaped how the world saw Diana. But it was entirely her side of the story. Charles, meanwhile, has never told his. Aside from admitting to infidelity in a 1994 interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, he has stayed silent and never publicly criticized Diana. Junor believes Charles truly tried to make Diana happy, but Diana wanted all of his attention, all of the time. And he just wasn't that man, she says. He was deeply committed to his work and it always came first. Another source of strain was the attention Diana received from the public and press, often at Charles's expense. During their 1983 tour of Australia,
on March 20th, 1983, Princess Diana and Prince Charles landed in Alice Springs, a remote town located in the heart of Central Australia.
Charles reportedly felt overshadowed by Diana. Junor, who had joined them on earlier tours, remembers the same dynamic during their visit to Wales just after the honeymoon. The crowds were there for Diana. At royal walkabouts, Charles would greet people on one side of the street and Diana on the other. But people on Charles' side often sighed in disappointment. They handed him flowers and asked him to pass them to Diana. The press were obsessed with her too. Charles could give a heartfelt speech about the environment or his charitable work, but the next day the headlines would be about Diana's hair, her dress, or whether she looked pregnant. This took a toll. Charles had spent his life being the star of the show, Junor explains. Now he was pushed into the background while his wife, often for the most superficial reasons, became the main attraction. Who could blame him for being upset? Diana later told Andrew Morton that she knew her marriage to Charles was over when their second son, Harry, was born in 1984. She was devastated by comments Charles allegedly made after the birth. "Something inside of me died," Diana confessed. By 1986, the marriage had completely broken down, and Charles was in what Penny Junor describes as a critical low. Two mutual friends, concerned for him, contacted Camilla separately and urged her to reach out. She picked up the phone, and their friendship began anew. Charles and Camilla saw each other again in 1986 when Charles invited her and her husband, Andrew, for tea at Highgrove. Over the following months, their friendship deepened, and by 1987, they were romantically involved again, according to Junor. Meanwhile, Andrew was still unfaithful to Camilla, and she felt unloved in her marriage. By this time, Diana had also had multiple affairs. Her first, likely with her bodyguard Barry Monarchy, was followed by her well-known relationship with James Hewitt, a former British Army officer. By the time Charles returned to Camilla, Diana and Charles were leading separate lives. Charles and Diana were living largely separate lives by 1986, and his affair with Camilla continued. In December 1992, after years of speculation from the press, British Prime Minister John Major announced their formal separation. In the summer of 1994, Charles gave a televised interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, where he admitted to infidelity and expressed a troubling lack of sympathy for Diana and distance from his family. This interview, Junor suggests, was the turning point that led to Andrew Parker Bowles divorcing Camilla. They announced their divorce in January 1995.
Camilla and Andrew attempted to downplay their affairs in public. In January 1995, the couple announced their divorce in a statement that called it a private matter.
In November 1995, Diana gave her famous Panorama interview with Martin Bashir, in which she famously said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Soon after, the Queen suggested that Charles and Diana should divorce. Their divorce was finalized in August 1996, after 4 years of separation. On 31st August 1997, Diana tragically died in a car accident in Paris at the age of 36. In January 1999, Charles and Camilla made their first public appearance as a couple. Their engagement was announced on the 10th of February of 2005, and they married a couple of months later, on the 9th of April, in a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, followed by a service of blessing at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. To understand the man at the center of it all, we have to go back to the beginning. Before Charles was a king, a husband, and a father. Background on King Charles. Charles was born on the 14th of November 1948 during the reign of his maternal grandfather, King George VI. He was the first child of Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, later Queen Elizabeth II, and Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Delivered by caesarean section at Buckingham Palace, Charles was christened Charles Philip Arthur George on the 15th of December 1948 in the music room of Buckingham Palace by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher. When George VI passed away on the 6th of February 1952, Charles's mother became Queen Elizabeth II, making him the heir apparent. As the monarch's eldest son, he automatically inherited the traditional titles of Duke of Cornwall and, in Scotland, Duke of Rothesay, Earl of Carrick, Baron of Renfrew, Lord of the Isles, and Prince and Great Steward of Scotland. The following year, Charles attended his mother's coronation at Westminster Abbey. At age 5, Charles's education began with Catherine Peebles as his governess at Buckingham Palace. He started attending Hill House School in London in November 1956, becoming the first heir apparent to be educated at a school instead of by a private tutor. Charles did not receive special treatment at Hill House. and his headmaster encouraged him to play football with the other boys, stressing that no one should be deferential. Charles continued his education at two of his father's former schools. He attended Cheam School in Hampshire from 1958, and then Gordonstown in Scotland in 1962, a school known for its rigorous curriculum. Charles later became its patron in 2024. In his 1994 biography, Charles described Gordonstown as difficult and harsh, admitting he was bullied. However, he later spoke positively of the school, saying it taught him a lot about himself and his abilities. In 1966, Charles spent time at the Timbertop campus of Geelong Grammar School in Australia, where he enjoyed his studies and a school trip to Papua New Guinea. Charles's time at Timbertop was the happiest part of his education, and he later emulated his father by becoming head boy at Gordonstown. He graduated in 1967 with 6 O-levels and 2 A-levels in history and French. Breaking royal tradition, Charles went to university instead of joining the British Armed Forces. In October 1967, he entered Trinity College, Cambridge, where he studied archaeology, anthropology, and later history.
Prince Charles, the future King of England, becomes a college freshman. Lord Butler, Master of Trinity, greets the Prince, who will major in archaeology and anthropology,
becoming the first heir apparent to earn a university degree. Charles graduated with a 2:2 Bachelor of Arts, BA degree in June 1970, and his degree was upgraded to a Master of Arts MA in 1975. On 26 July 1958, Charles was made Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester, although his formal investiture didn't take place until 1 July 1969 at Caernarfon Castle, in a televised ceremony that stirred controversy in Wales due to nationalist sentiments. Following this, Charles began to take on more public duties, delivering his first speech in the House of Lords in 1974, becoming the first royal to speak there since Edward VII in 1884. In 1976, Charles founded the Prince's Trust and began taking on more public responsibilities. He also traveled to the United States in 1981. Although he expressed interest in becoming the Governor-General of Australia in the mid-1970s, the proposal didn't progress due to a lack of public enthusiasm. Charles served in the Royal Air Force, RAF, and the Royal Navy during the 1970s. His military training began in 1969 during his second year at Cambridge, where he trained with the Cambridge University Air Squadron, learning to fly the Chipmunk aircraft. He received his RAF wings in August 1971. After completing the RAF training, Charles embarked on a naval career, enrolling in a 6-week course at the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth. Charles spent his final 10 months of active naval service as the commanding officer of the coastal minehunter HMS Bronington, beginning in February 1976. He retired from active service in 1976 with the rank of commander. Charles gave up flying after a 1994 incident where he crash-landed a BAE 146 in Islay. He was a passenger and had been invited to fly the aircraft, but the crew was later found negligent by a board of inquiry. In 1965, Charles undertook his first public engagement, attending a student garden party at the Palace of Holyrood House. Over the years, as Prince of Wales, he undertook numerous official duties on behalf of the Queen, completing 10,934 engagements between 2002 and 2022. He officiated at investitures and attended the funerals of foreign dignitaries. Charles regularly toured Wales, engaging in public duties each summer, including attending key national events such as the opening of the Senedd. Charles ascended to the British throne on the 8th of September 2022, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
At 73, he became the longest-serving British heir apparent, surpassing Edward VII's record of 59 years. He was also the oldest person to succeed to the throne, surpassing the previous record held by William IV, who was 64 when he became king in 1830. On the 9th of September 2022, Charles gave his first speech as king, paying tribute to his late mother and announcing the appointment of his eldest son, William, as Prince of Wales. The Accession Council formally proclaimed him king the following day in a televised ceremony, a first in British history. The proclamation was read out by local authorities across the UK and other Commonwealth realms. Charles and Camilla's coronation took place at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May, 2023. The event, which had been planned under the code name Operation Golden Orb, was intentionally simpler and shorter than his mother's coronation in 1953, in line with Charles's wish for a ceremony that was more reflective of modern Britain's diversity. In the end, after decades of scandal, heartbreak, and public scrutiny, Charles and Camilla stood side by side, crowned and united. Do you think King Charles married Diana out of pressure? Or do you think otherwise? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.